Welcome back, Econ Warriors, to Boss Economics World, the only place where we rip through the government's economic fairy tales like a chainsaw through a house of cards. I'm your host, the guy who's been screaming into the void about central bank blunders and political meddling since before it was cool. Today, we're diving headfirst into the latest Fed drama, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's tap dancing routine on CNBC, and the economic dumpster fire that's got your savings account sweating bullets. Buckle up, because this one's gonna sting. Alright, folks, let's start with the headlines that have the financial Twitterverse buzzing like a beehive on energy drinks. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Trump's economic golden boy, went on CNBC last Friday, June 27, 2025, to play coy about whether President Trump is itching to kick Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to the curb. Bessent's throwing out dates like October or November 2025 for a potential shadow Fed chair nomination, acting like this is some kind of West Wing cliffhanger. Oh, and get this, Powell's term as chair ends in May 2026, but he could still hang around on the Fed board until 2028, like that awkward ex who won't leave the party. Meanwhile, Bessent's dodging questions about his own ambitions, saying, "I've got the best job in Washington." Yeah, right, Scott, we all know you're eyeing that Fed throne like a kid staring at a candy jar. Now, if you're sitting at home thinking, why should I care about this Beltway drama? Fair question. On the surface, this looks like typical political posturing, the kind of inside baseball nonsense that only excites Wall Street suits and policy wonks. But hold on, because this isn't just about who gets the big chair at the Federal. This is about the economic tsunami that's brewing while the government and the Fed play musical chairs. Let's peel back the layers, shall we? Here's where things get juicy. Bessent casually slipped in a bombshell. Trump is, obviously worried that the Fed is behind the curve again, on interest rate cuts. Translation. The Fed's asleep at the wheel, and the economy's careening toward a cliff. Now, let's unpack this, because if you've been following Boss Economics World, you know we've been screaming about this for months. The Fed's been sitting on its hands, refusing to cut rates, even though inflation has come way down, as Bessent put it. But is he right? Let's look at the data. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index, CPI, inflation rate in May 2025 was just 2.1% year-over-year, right around the Fed's sacred 2% target. Core inflation, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, was a smidge higher at 2.3%. Compare that to the scorching 9.1% peak we saw in June 2022, and yeah, inflation's cooled off big time. So why hasn't the Fed slashed rates? Here's where the government's fingerprints start showing up on the crime scene. The Fed's been obsessed with data dependence, which is just a fancy way of saying they're paralyzed by indecision. They're terrified of cutting rates too soon and reigniting inflation, but in the process, they're choking the economy. The federal funds rate is still sitting at a punitive 5.25% to 5.50% as of June 2025, the highest level in over 2 decades. Meanwhile, economic growth is sputtering. The Commerce Department reported that GDP growth slowed to an annualized 1.4% in Q1 2025, down from a robust 3.4% in Q4 2024. And the labor market? Oh, it's flashing red. The unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3% in May 2025, the highest since early 2022, and job openings are at their lowest since 2021, per the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, JOLTS. So, let me get this straight, inflation's under control, growth is tanking, people are losing jobs, and the Fed's response is, crickets. This is what Bessent means by, behind the curve, folks, and it's not just a minor oopsie, it's a recipe for a full-blown recession. But don't take my word for it. Look at the yield curve, that trusty recession predictor. The 10-year Treasury yield has been lower than the 2-year yield for over a year now, a classic inversion that's preceded nearly every recession since the 1950s. The New York Fed's recession probability model, based on this inversion, is screaming a 61% chance of a downturn by mid-2026. And yet, the Fed's sitting there, twiddling its thumbs, while Trump's administration is busy playing Fed chair roulette. Beautiful, just beautiful. Now, let's zoom out to the real meat of this story, the government's grubby hands all over the Fed's independence. Trump's obsession with controlling the Fed isn't new. Remember back in 2019 when he called Powell an enemy and demanded zero interest rates? Fast forward to 2025, and it's déjà vu all over again. Bessent's comments about a potential shadow Fed chair aren't just idle chatter, they're a signal that Trump wants a loyalist in charge, someone who'll slash rates on command and juice the economy just in time for the 2026 midterms. And who better than Scott Bessent himself, a guy who's already parroting Trump's talking points on national TV? This is dangerous, folks. The Fed's independence is supposed to be sacrosanct, a firewall against political pressure. Why? Because when politicians meddle with monetary policy, bad things happen. Look at history. In the 1970s, President Nixon pressured Fed Chair Arthur Burns to keep rates low to boost the economy ahead of the 1972 election. The result? Runaway inflation that took a decade to tame. More recently, look at Turkey, where President Erdogan's insistence on low rates despite soaring inflation has turned the Turkish lira into wallpaper. Inflation there hit 69% in 2024, and the economy's in shambles. Is this the playbook Trump wants to follow? Because it sure looks like it. And let's not forget the hypocrisy here. Trump's been railing against the Fed for not cutting rates, but his own policies are partly to blame for the mess we're in. Remember the $1.9 trillion stimulus package he signed in 2021, followed by massive tax cuts that ballooned the deficit? The Congressional Budget Office projects the federal deficit will hit $2.6 trillion in 2025, or 7.3% of GDP, the highest since World War II outside of the COVID years. This is classic fiscal irresponsibility, folks. When you flood the economy with borrowed money, you overheat it, and then the Fed has to slam on the brakes with high rates. But instead of taking responsibility, Trump's pointing fingers at Powell, and Bessent's playing along like a good soldier. Now, let's bring this home to you, the viewer. While the elites in Washington are busy playing their power games, the real economy, the one you live in, is getting crushed. High interest rates aren't just numbers on a screen, they're strangling small businesses, killing the housing market, and draining your savings. The National Association of Realtors reported that existing home sales in May 2025 were down 12% year-over-year, and median home prices are still at a nosebleed $410,000, pricing out first-time buyers. Mortgage rates, tied to the Fed's benchmark, are hovering around 7%, making homeownership a pipe dream for millions. Small businesses? Forget it. The National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, says 24% of small firms cited high interest rates as their top concern in June 2025, the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. These are the mom-and-pop shops, the local diners, the startups that drive job growth, and they're getting crushed because the Fed's too scared to act, and the government's too busy playing politics. And don't even get me started on your savings. With inflation down to 2.1%, you'd think the Fed would ease up on rates, giving savers a break. But nope, your high-yield savings account is still earning peanuts compared to the 5% plus rates on credit card debt. The average American household now carries $7,951 in credit card debt, per the Federal Reserve's latest data, up 8% from last year. This is what happens when the government and the Fed fail to coordinate, folks, the little guy gets screwed. So, what's the fix? First, the Fed needs to wake up and cut rates, now. The data's clear, inflation's tamed, growth stalling, and jobs are at risk. A quarter-point cut at the July 2025 meeting isn't enough, we need a bold half-point slash to signal confidence and get the economy moving. Second, Trump needs to keep his hands off the Federal. Nominating a loyalist like Bessent as chair would be a disaster, eroding trust in the institution and risking long-term economic stability. And third, the government needs to get its fiscal house in order. Stop spending like a drunken sailor, and maybe, just maybe, the Fed won't have to clean up your mess with sky-high rates. Here's the bottom line, folks, this Fed chair drama isn't just gossip for the financial pages. It's a symptom of a deeper disease, a government that's more interested in power plays than sound economics, and a central bank that's too timid to act. The result? An economy teetering on the edge of recession, with everyday Americans bearing the brunt. So, keep your eyes peeled, because here at Boss Economics World, we'll keep calling out the nonsense, crunching the numbers, and fighting for your wallet. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and remember, it's your economy, not theirs.